One.
Okay, so we are recording. Welcome back. So my name is Natasha Rumble, and I'm joined today by Michael McDowell again.
Hi, Tash.
Not in his caravan today, it seems.
I'm not. No, I'm in Caboolture in Queensland, back in Queensland.
Okay.
South Australia had a COVID scare, and they had a very knee-jerk reaction to it, and they shut down, and they were going into lockdown. We found that out at 2:00 on Wednesday afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
And lockdown was 11:59 on Wednesday afternoon. Yeah, so we drove from the Eyre Peninsula, which was absolutely gorgeous, to Broken Hill.
Okay.
Couple hundred miles, 450 kilometres. We did that, and we crossed the border into New South Wales at 11 p.m. at night. So we did the dash. We did the mad dash, Tash, and then we dashed home.
Okay.
Back to Caboolture. So we thought, okay, we're going to have a bit more time at the beach.
Okay. And today we are joined by a very special guest and friend, Nancy Gaydon, who joins us from California. Yeah. So it's so awesome to be able to connect across, like you said earlier, Nancy, before we were recording, to connect across the pond, that big Pacific Ocean. We're on opposite sides of it. It's very amazing that we can be here at the same time and space, in a sense.
Yeah.
Wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me.
I was lucky enough to meet Nancy in person in Maui 2 years ago, nearly to the week. I think in about 2 weeks' time. It was the first week of December, and we had seen each other on Zoom meetings before, but to actually spend time with Nancy was wonderful. And look, Nancy is a yoga teacher and a meditation practitioner of sorts for quite a long time. Nancy has a background in Buddhism, and she's going to share with us, I suppose, part of her journey, or a chunk of her journey, from being someone who was in a monastic tradition, and has come to discover and embrace this instinctive meditation practice that we've been talking about for the last 12 weeks. So we're just going to ask Nancy to maybe just share her story and let us know where she's come from, what it was like being in a Buddhist monastery, and what is it that brought her to the instinctive meditation path. How's that sound, Nancy?
I'm happy to share whatever might be helpful for others that this might resonate with. And I've personally received just profound benefit from the instinctive meditation tradition, and so it's really a pleasure to be here sharing with both of you today.
I think both Tash and I have said in other podcasts, we really want to get this out to people. It's like a little hidden gem, a little hidden secret, and for us, it's how do we get people to understand that meditation isn't necessarily what people think as the traditional meditation practices are, and that it can be different, and it can be our own, and not something that's impinged upon us, not something that's given to us as rules and regulations. So our conversation, I suppose, is a little bit about rebellion, honoring the inner rebel that is part of our being, the one that calls bullshit here and there, and says, oh, that's not resonating with me, I feel something different.
Yeah, and when we talk about honoring the inner rebel, the word that actually comes to me now is loyalty, because we are actually being loyal to ourselves when we honor the rebel. And so what I love about this approach is understanding, or like, what is true for me and staying loyal to that, right?
Mhm.
And so for me, that's really what the inner rebel is about, even though sometimes it can sound like, oh, we're, sticking up to the man, or we're, not wanting to go along with rules that are being imposed upon us. But I think, the flip side of the coin is it's not so much about that. It's more about tuning to what's true for me, right? So for me, the monastic tradition at which I spent 5 years in, I imagine it's kind of like if you were to join the Marines and they were going to train 1,000 Marines to get in shape, right?
Mhm.
There's going to be a protocol that we want everybody to follow. And the protocol may work better for some types of people with certain dispositions or body types or health versus other people, but there's kind of a standard protocol, and everybody kind of goes through that process. And hopefully when you come out the other end, you'll have somewhat similar results, right?
Mhm.
And that approach is very different from if you were to go out and get a personal trainer today. They're going to start by interviewing you and asking you what your goals are, where you're coming from, what injuries do you have, and then customizing a program for you that's really intended to produce the best results for you.
Mm.
And I think that is the brilliance of what instinctive meditation is versus, what a lot of the monastic traditions have more of a protocol, because it's intended to kind of preserve a lot of these teachings for future generations to benefit from, but it's more of a standard protocol in a lot of ways, right?
Mhm.
And so for me, there was a beauty of just being in the protocol, right? Of like, oh, I just do this and this and this and this. And there's kind of like a comfort to that. It's something's already dictated for me and I just have to follow it.
Yeah.
And also it begins to undermine my own judgment for what might really be the best approach for me, right? Because I start to put more emphasis on what's being told to me versus what might really be true for me. And so that's kind of the flip side of these standard protocols, is that we might find that I'm using a technique that's really not for me, but I'm forcing myself to use it anyway because I'm supposed to. And I'm hoping that if I just keep doing it, I'm going to come out at the other end with, this particular result that's told to me. That's the result you'll get if you do this, regardless if we have a conversation whether it's the right thing for me.
So you kind of proceed with this almost blind faith that whatever is being prescribed to you it's all going to work out, and you just have to sort of trust the process. And there's a sort of seduction, as you say, in that approach, that, well, I'll trust this, and at the end, I'll achieve whatever outcomes are being suggested or promised to me. Just as you're speaking, it makes me think about nutrition. I'm not a nutritionist and I haven't studied it, but my understanding is that we all are different and we all have different needs nutritionally and biologically and physiologically in terms of what is nourishing for our particular, inner ecosystem. And if we were to all just eat the same meal every day, and told, you must just eat coconuts and avocado, that's it. There might be some time where it is satisfying and indeed nourishing and you feel good, but over time there might be this desire to rebel against that prescribed diet and taste different things and explore different flavors and textures. And maybe if you're really listening to that rebel and your body, you might start to create a way of eating that really suits you and you thrive. So I can see some similarities here. I'm really keen to hear more about your journey of meditation and sort of what led you to start to, as you say, make that switch of listening to your own little calls and little whispers inside.
Yeah, it's something I'm still learning to do, to be honest, because having been trained in that way for so long, it's almost I lost a lot of my own sense of what my preferences are. Because when you follow a protocol for so long, it's like you kind of become more of a robot. You can become that way, especially if you're also, doing it in the name of reducing your ego. Like it's almost like you're intentionally wanting to erase what they might call mundane desires or even having preferences, right? And so for me, it's still new. It's still an exploration. It's still physical therapy for myself to listen to that, like to ask the question, well, what does feel true for me? Even if it's not what the teachings, traditionally say, even the permission to give myself to come out of a meditation at 17 minutes instead of that 20 that's been touted forever, right? And before it was like, oh, it's only 17. I have to sit for 3 more minutes for it to be valid, right? And just to really start to even say, hey, this feels right for me. And to step out of it feeling whole within myself, like that is, that's a learning for me. So I really want to, say that the instinctive approach it's really an art, right? Because you can, because you can follow standard protocols. Like the Marines, many 80%, 90% may still come out the other end really fit, right? And then there might be people that really injure themselves in that process. And so this approach is really actually much more kind. It's actually taking the time to ask, what do you want and what works for you? And what would, for me, I was writing this down before we met, meditation as a way of finding coherence with our own essence. Like, what does coherence feel like for you? And that's a question that I think this approach is inviting us to have a relationship with that question, right? And that we're creating the space to explore that question and not just take what somebody else says as gospel and cultivating that sense of, of self.
You would use the word inviting. It's an invitation to find your own way, right? Yeah. And Tash and I are both yoga teachers and both had meditation teachings from before. My teachers were devotees of Yogananda. So there was a lot of bowing down to the teachings from above, and this is the way that you reach whatever. This is the way that you do it. You chant these mantras, you sing your heart out. And while I was in that, my heart was exploding, right? It was just amazingly beautiful while I was in it. Yeah. But eventually I got to the point where actually I don't want to be bowing down and putting my hands on someone else's feet. I don't feel like I don't want to do that. And one of like Nancy, Tash and I have come up with 4 rules. Yeah. And one of them was run away from anyone who glorifies themselves, right? run away from a guru, and it's like we are learning a practice that is making you your own guru, your own inner wisdom, your own inner path, your own inner school is what we're learning. And there's some sense, and there's some sense of rebelliousness of being a rebel in being within something and then stepping out of it, and that can be hard. Like that stepping out can be hard.
And I love earlier, sorry, Nancy, that earlier you said something along the lines that you consider this method or this approach, this path to meditation as art or as an art form. And I completely relate to that. And I often think of it as very, very delicate, sort of fine-tuned skills of and almost very subtle skills of listening to yourself and your needs and your desires and your cravings and your wants and your longings, and it's a skill. It's very, very, very delicate, I would say. And I'm thinking that, okay, is a set of skills, but they're not necessarily easy. It can sound easy. Just listen to yourself and follow your inner cravings. But for many of us, and I'd like to say particularly women, but men have got their conditioning certainly as well. And so, for women, I think we're told how to behave, how to hold ourselves, how to look, how to exercise, so many ways that of conforming in life that we need to almost bulldoze down to get to that inner whispering and that inner longing, and to be able to communicate with her inside.
I completely agree. And that and ways to do yoga, ways to meditate, the list goes on. And the like the art of this is almost more like learning to play an instrument, but really tuning into the particularities of that particular instrument, because every violin has a slightly different sound, and so there's art. I like what you said. It's very delicate, and it takes more attention to the subtle to be able to play skillfully, I suppose, and make that music.
And one of our other rules, Michael mentioned, we have created some general rules and guidelines from which to base your meditation around. One of them being, if there's a suggestion of a guru culture, then maybe turn the other way and maybe run. Another one is holding yourself gently and being really, really tender and really, really kind. And you mentioned this, that it's a very kind approach of meditation. And when you liken that to playing an instrument, you don't hold a violin and really clench it and grip it, or you don't slam the keys of a piano. It's really quite a delicate touch and a very delicate sensitivity of tuning into sound and notes and chords and your body, how you hold your body, how you're breathing. It's a beautiful analogy of playing an instrument to this approach to meditation, that delicate intimacy with the experience that is simultaneous both within and without.
Yeah, and that's why I also love how Lorin and Camille teach together, because Camille really embodies that, physically. I wanted to go back to your first rule, or your first guideline of, kind of run the other way if someone's there's this guru culture. And for me, it's like, going back to the honoring the inner rebel, to me, it's honoring that I have a boundary, a healthy boundary. And because without that healthy boundary, there's no way that we can have a sense of sovereignty about ourselves. And I think when you don't have that sense of sovereignty about yourself, it becomes really dangerous when you come into a guru culture. But if you do have a strong sense of sovereignty, You know, you could potentially not run away, and you might even, you know, there are beautiful teachings out there, but to have that alertness of where my boundaries are and what is protective of me, right? Versus I think that's where that rebel energy is really important, because the rebel energy is a protective energy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not just like F you, anybody who is an authority figure, but it's just that it's a protecting a sense of sovereignty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and talking about the distinction between rules and boundaries, I'm just thinking now, my mind's going crazy, and I'm thinking about raising children, or particularly raising teenagers. The role of a parent or a teacher, or a mentor is not to impose rules upon that child, that developing human, but rather to have boundaries, and because rules sort of imply rigidity, and they can't move. They're fixed. Boundaries can be, really tight and firm, but they can also be soft and flexible or permeable. And along the journey of meditation, I guess we're learning about our own boundaries and how to apply them with assertion, but with kindness, but with that sense of inner authority and inner respect, really, for ourselves.
Yeah, and I brought a quote to share with you guys, which I think really spoke to me about this topic too. And this is from Alice Walker from The Color Purple. She said, "I am an expression of the divine, just like a peach is, just like a fish is. I have a right to be this way. I can't apologize for that, nor can I change it, nor do I want to. We will never have to be other than who we are in order to be successful. We realize that we are ourselves unlimited and our experience is valid."
Mhm.
And I love that, that
So beautiful.
if a peach can be a peach, it's like, what's with us not being able to honor this particular expression?
Yeah.
And to me, like, this is what this approach is about. And for some people, it might be really easy. I know what kind of peach I am, and I love myself for that. And for some other people, it might have been kind of programmed out of them to even remember their peachiness, and that there's a recovery period. And you're asking, how have I kind of come to this path? It's like, honestly, it's been a recovery period. It's been a recovery period of recognizing that there are individual essences, right, that are valid and that are just as valid, right, and just as divine.
Absolutely.
And so on that path of intimacy, where we're learning to, acknowledge and recognize and love and cherish our own peachness. Our own.
I always end up talking about food for some reason.
Our own unique expression of life. I think then it translates out into life, that we then begin to appreciate similarities between us and others, and certainly recognize and honor and respect differences. And so we begin to create this this flow of having more harmony within, and then more harmonious relationships. We're talking about music again as well, food and music. Did you have something to add, Michael?
I'm just enjoying the conversation that you guys are having. Nancy brought up one of the sutras before we started the conversation. Sutra 32, and in the word Sva Tantra, yeah. As that she thought was particularly relevant to, honoring the inner rebel, honoring ourself. And I'll just read this definition of Sva Tantra as the light's gone out in here, which is not helpful. Independence, self-will, freedom, one's own system or school, one's own army, free, uncontrolled, full grown, surely that's one of our goals, is to grow into ourselves fully, that that word encompasses so much about what you've been talking about, Nancy, about this development of boundaries, this development of yourself, the ability to say yes and no for what's right for you.
Yeah,
all in one word.
One of my favorite, I guess, ideas in here about Sva Tantra, and Lorin says that in meditation, if we don't start with freedom and independence, then we're not going to end up there.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why it's so important that we talk about this, because I feel it makes me sad when I think about all the beautiful peaches, all the beautiful individuals out there that might have the idea that I have to become an orange in order to become spiritually coherent, or whatever it is that that we share this message about meditation as really being in coherence with your own individual essence.
Yeah, and I think that, that process of Sva Tantra, it's a process, that process of growth and evolution towards some sense of autonomy. We're ever changing as we move through life. And there are times when we'll fall off the path towards, achieving that sense of inner autonomy. And again, it's so crucial. It's so important that we, along the journey, we hold ourselves tenderly. It's okay if we do fall back to that, those times of conditioning that have made an imprint on our inner being. It's likely that it will happen again and again and again, and that we might betray ourselves again and again and again in big ways and in small ways, and we might behave and act and speak in a way that is against our inner wisdom.
Yeah.
But we keep moving forwards.
Yeah, I suppose my question to I suppose you both is, how do you practically practice that? Like what's a skill? What's something that happens in a meditation practice that helps you? What's the thought process in the middle of what something's going on that helps you to practice that sense of not being wrong, that sense of not following rules, seems to be ingrained in the meditation practice? How do we practice that in this instinctive meditation process, which is different to what?
I go back to actually what Tosh talked about earlier about how we hold the instrument. Because if you hold it lightly with just the right amount of pressure, you can feel more subtle changes, right, in what's happening. And if you're gripping it really tight, you're not going to feel some of the more subtle changes. And so I feel like in meditation, when we hold ourselves gently, when we hold ourselves lightly, we can feel the ripple of energy of where it's going, right? And, it took me a while to start to see that imposition energy was so normal for me that I wasn't even noticing that it was happening, right?
Mm.
The lighter that I could hold myself, the more I could start to see that energy coming in, and then the more I can allow for freedom. That's just kind of my 2 cents about
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Michael, I guess you asked the
Yeah.
question, what does it practically look like? You know, how do we practically apply that skill?
Yeah.
And I guess for me, you know, and we've mentioned this in previous conversations, movement, you know, for me, if I'm feeling like I have betrayed myself, or I'm feeling, you know, stuck or stagnant in some part of my growth and evolution, or I've stepped back a little bit, movement and breath, and then almost treating myself like a small child, and you know, and soothing myself through breath and movement, and practicing forgiveness. You know, I don't know if forgiveness is the right term, but accepting, you know, who you are and where you are in this moment, and respecting, really respecting where you are on your personal path of evolution.
Mm.
Knowing that it is a process, it's not a goal, there's no end goal. We don't get there and then we're like, oh, okay, I'm done, I made it.
And I'm a guru now.
Yeah. I'm so freaking spiritual now. You can't touch me, nothing can. But you know, sometimes we need to have that attitude, actually, to stay fierce within ourselves. Sometimes we do need to put up some boundaries and just go, you can't touch this.
It's true. And one's Svatantra, another one of those definitions, one's own army. Yeah. One's own army. So look, there's so much richness in the language of the sutras, right? In the language of Sanskrit, but also in the language that Lorin's translated it, or we, as we say, poetically transliterated it into.
Yeah, in the Sutra 32, the last line, right? The texture of the self is untamed freedom.
Well, Nancy, this is your this is your invitation to share the whole thing with us.
Sure.
I would love to hear you read it.
Strong or soft, wild or serene, wherever breath flows, there is song. Hear its whisper, touching behind the face, singing in the throat, and dancing spirals in the sanctuary of your heart. In this practice of listening, a moment may come when you just want to lie down. This is a doorway. Surrender. Fall into the wide open embrace of life. You are the instrument breath is playing. All the meditations you have ever loved are vibrating in this luxurious hum, continuing even in sleep and dreams. This is your school, just you and infinity. The texture of the self is untamed freedom.
Wow, electricity through me. The texture of the self is untamed freedom. You're right, that last line.
It's actually really amazing because as I'm reading this, it's like almost everything we've talked about today.
I was thinking the same.
Yeah.
Instruments
is here.
Yeah.
And that's the thing with the Radiance Sutras. There's, you know, 112 gateways into meditation, and they have arisen from conversations between, well, it's believed that these sutras have arisen from conversations between two people, likely a man and a woman, And they're talking about experiences that, for many of us, we can relate to, at least in part. And they connect with something deep and primal and instinctive within us. That was a beautiful choice, Sutra 32 from the Radiance Sutras. Do you want to speak a little bit about the sutra and why you chose that one?
Actually, you guys chose it when you said we're going to talk about the inner rebel. And I was like, Svatantra, right? It's this, because again, to me, it's loyalty to the self,
Yeah.
the sense of freedom and independence that is my right, right? That is my peachiness as a divine expression, and to acknowledge, to realize it, right? And to stay true to it. I think that is, that is a true art, right? And, in this conversation, you said about, for the sutras, this conversation between Shiva and Shakti, which, can also be said, the conversation between what's unmanifested and what's manifest, right? What is potential energy versus kinetic energy? Like, it's always a conversation that's happening between the two. That's what life is. Life is always potential energy moving into kinetic, back to potential, changing forms. And that all of this movement is the current of it, is this untamed freedom. The current of it is everything is divine. And so these 112, they say it's 112 gateways, but there's innumerous gateways. And that's for all of us to discover.
And a lot of it all wrapped up in that one word, Svatantra. Thank you for sharing Svatantra with us, Nancy.
Thank you. And thanks to Lorin and Camille for bringing this version into the world.
Is there anything else you'd like to say, to add to the conversation, Nancy, about, making that transition from maybe a practice that has been prescribed? I'm talking about meditation, maybe even yoga practice, one that is almost didactic in nature. And do you have any advice or want to speak to, again, your personal journey of that, inquisitiveness to look for another way? Do you have any advice of how to go about that, or how to traverse that bridge of searching for another way, and what you might experience along that transition?
Wow, what a question. I know that first of all, that we've gone over our time, but I'm loving this conversation. I hope this is okay with you guys.
We do.
There's two parts to it. I feel one is kind of acknowledging that I have been imposing on myself. I think that's a first step, is to acknowledge the imposition, because if you don't acknowledge the imposition, you're not even in a place to have awareness that it's happening, because it's so automatic.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's so automatic. And so to acknowledge the imposition, I think is first, so that you start to create some space for possibility. Right. And so we're creating that space and possibility, and then there's the gift of wonder and delight. Right. And so I think that's also why these sutras are so juicy, because they are inviting us into wonder and delight. And so if I can bring awareness to that, wow, there's impositions happening, and that I'm aware that there's this dynamic there. And at the same time, I can bring my awareness to wonder and delight. I feel that it's kind of self-nourishing and self-healing in a way that, it's almost like the wonder and delight will help me discover what I'm drawn to. And that'll kind of build up that neural pathway of what feels natural, I'm naturally attracted to, versus the imposition neural pathway, which, you know, in the beginning, it might be so strong that the other one feels like it's barely recognizable. And so that's why I feel that the wonder and delight are such great ways, because it's so visceral. And it's also like it's in the wisdom of our cells. And if we can tune into the wisdom of the cells, we, you know, are accessing a strong pathway that is, you know, might be separate from the shoulds of the mental pathways.
Yeah. And there's a sense of like playfulness and fun. And I think from my personal experience, that transition from almost quite a serious and sort of stoic approach to meditation towards something that was fun and playful and creative and had an infinite scope for creativity. There were times, I guess, where I doubted where it would all go, maybe initially, although I was drawn quite strongly to this approach almost instantly. I think the sort of monastic path of meditation, there's hints and suggestions that there's sort of a linear hierarchical process along the journey. Conversely, with the path of intimacy, the Radiance Sutras meditation approach, there's no linear path. There's no sort of set sequence to follow. The skills that we develop along the way don't exist in a hierarchical structure. And we can jump and bounce and flow and move between different styles and different approaches, depending on who we are and how we feel in that moment. It's really refreshing and liberating, I think, and fun and playful.
Yeah, and you know, this is and it's I guess, like you said, it depends on who you are. You know, I think there are some people that a really linear approach works for them. You know, there's going to be some people that go through that Maurine process and they love every minute of that. And that's like their dharma, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's one of the characteristics of non-dual traditions, which this is from Kashmir Shaivism, is a non-dual tradition, and very much like the Zen tradition in Buddhism, is that there is this immediacy. And there is no linear immediacy. It's either here, you're either here or you're not. Right? And yeah, it's like I one of my favorite Buddhist teachers, Sylvia Borstein, she's a little Jewish grandma, and one of the things she said in a retreat was that there was no advanced meditation. You're either here or you're not. And she was joking about it, but it's just a sense that, especially in the tantric tradition, there is an immediacy, and for some people, this is so joyful. Like, you know, when you look at the way nature works, and the way nature creates, it feels joyful and creative, and she's obviously having fun. So, you know, I love, it really resonates with me. It's just because it's like Tosh said, it's more fun, it's delightful, and we get to celebrate like everything. Versus somehow you have to poo-poo on this in order to get there, and yeah, so it's
when you say celebrate everything, that's celebrating the whole spectrum of experience, right? Celebrating, because come back not to reality, come back to when a soul is called onto a path that includes going into meditation, it's looking to grow. And in growth there is healing, and sometimes in healing there's pain, and we've all go through that, right? We're invited into wonder and delight as we start off our journey, and we can come back to it over and over again. But also there is a reality that as we go into wonder and delight, there is ouch comes up as well. You know, we come back to this again and again, that there is the full experience of life, and that we acknowledge that we are called to this, and as people are called to develop themselves, to have a richer, fuller life, we're going to experience stuff, and that's okay. And
I think this particular style of meditation helps us to be with that more gracefully.
Yeah, because like we said before, holding tenderly, holding the instrument gently, feeling the disharmonies, the little vibrations, feeling the perfect harmonies, being able, and if you're playing a violin, you've got a finger that moves the note just by rolling the finger, so that it could be disharmonious or harmonious, and just by having it, being in tune with it, touching it. You know, another analogy for that might be feeling the reins, just having very soft hands on the reins of a horse. You know, that your soul is going, and you're just feeling where it's going, and just the slightest touch or the slightest thought can move its direction a fraction. You know, but there's a softness in feeling what's happening. That's my little rant.
I love your rants.
I like that, Michael. And I like when you said, you know, that it is the full spectrum of experience. And when we know our instrument more personally, more intimately, you know, we can tune it a bit better depending on what's happening, right? I think a violinist standing in the snow, you know, the conditions are different. You know, he's going to have to tune the instrument differently.
Yeah.
Right? So having that intimacy help us with that.
And then talking about the spectrum of emotion, if we you know, choose to embark upon this human life and are looking to create a life that is rich and full and meaningful and fulfilling, then we must accept the full spectrum of human emotions. We can't, you know, try to numb them. And so why not take the attitude of cherishing these precious expressions of what it means to be a human being. And so we come back to cherishing, celebrating, loving, and holding ourselves gently, and tuning ourselves up. This has been so wonderful. I feel like we could talk for hours. Most likely we could, and perhaps in the future we could continue on this topic or another topic. But I thank you so much, Nancy, for joining us. And thank you again, Michael. It's kind of strange to see you not in a caravan after all these recordings.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks again. And we will, for the listeners and viewers, we will put in the details, ways for which you can contact Nancy. She is teaching currently in California. So I'll put all those details there for you to find her and follow her. And we shall meet again next week, Michael, and perhaps pick up the topic of the taboos.
That sounds awesome. That sounds awesome. Nancy, Dragon Sister.
Thank you so much. This is really great.
Thank you. It's been awesome.
Thank you. And I truly hope we get to meet in person. If not, we'll meet in Zoom land again.
Yes, let's. Well, however we can get together.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks again. Enjoy your evening,
Thank you.
your morning, wherever you are.